Yes, first of all, I just want to introduce myself. I have seen a lot of your names for the last 10 years, but this is actually my first experience actually being on campus. I started teaching for LeTourneau 10 years ago. In fact, I was a counselor before that, and I had young children at the time. I had a baby and a 2-year-old, and was looking for something to do very part-time. And I saw an ad in the Austin American-Statesman for an adjunct psychology instructor to teach one night a week. And so I went ahead and applied, and maybe they didn't have too many applicants because I was able to, get on board at LeTourneau. At that time, I really didn't anticipate becoming a teacher. I just was pretty much doing it because it worked so well with my family schedule. But I really enjoyed it and enjoyed it so much that I decided to go back to get a PhD in educational psychology and finished that in 2010. The Austin campus closed down, I guess it was in maybe 2008, 9, something like that. So then I went to teaching exclusively online, and so I taught for LeTourneau undergraduate classes all the way up to graduate counseling classes. And so I also teach full-time for community college in Central Texas. I live near Austin. So I want to thank you all for being here. And so today we'll be talking about the joys and challenges of teaching Generation Me. And so first I want to ask you all, how many of you have been teaching for more than 10 years? Okay, more than 20 years. Okay, 15 years. I'm trying to figure out who's, okay. So have you noticed any difference in the students' attitudes and behaviors now than when you first started teaching? So what are some of those differences? When you raise your hand and you get asked questions, what are some of those differences that you can think of?
Work ethic.
Okay, so work ethic. And I'm assuming that you're saying that it's gone down as opposed to up. Okay.
Focus.
Yeah.
Less focused, more distracted.
Spirit of entitlement.
A spirit of entitlement. What is entitlement? What is that? Let's just define that. It will be coming up on the PowerPoint. What does that mean? When we say someone is entitled?
Well, I start with an A, and I should get an A.
Right.
Because I paid for the class.
I paid for it.
I paid for the class.
I paid for this, and therefore I deserve an A. Entitlement is feeling like you deserve something you didn't actually earn. And so I say, you know what you paid for was an opportunity for credit. That's what you paid for. Right? But that's exactly what entitlement is. They feel like they deserve something without actually earning it. And so we do see a lot of students, and I don't want to be negative and say every student that comes into our classrooms have that attitude, but there are quite a few of them that do have that mentality. Okay, so...
I got something positive.
Okay.
A willingness and an ability to think creatively.
Okay, and they can think outside the box. Many of them can. And I'm going to talk, it's not just the challenges, we'll talk about the good things about them too, right? But some of them are more creative now, you think. Maybe less conforming than they were before. And so there are some good things about this generation. Now, if we talk about Generation Me, what do you think of, what generation is this? How old are these people?
16 to 20.
Yeah.
I was like 16 to 20.
Okay, now Jean Twenge is a researcher. She's actually written a book on this, and she actually says that Generation Me is people born in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Now, I don't completely agree with that because that would place me in Generation Me and my 13-year-old son, who was born in 99, in Generation Me. And he and I do not think the same way at all, right? I mean, most 13-year-olds don't necessarily agree with what their parents are saying. But I kind of feel like, after having read the book and from personal experience, I think it's teenagers, people in their 20s, and even to mid-30s. I don't want to put myself in that category, although I may have some of those tendencies as well, because I'm going to talk about how our upbringing and our culture does affect the way that we think about the world. So,
And I also think they have shorter attention spans and greater expectations of what they expect of faculty.
Exactly. Expectations are very high, not necessarily for themselves, okay, but for their instructors. Right? And it's all about due process. Instead of coming and talking instructor, they go straight to the department chair. If there's a problem.
I emailed him yesterday and he still hasn't gotten back to me.
Exactly. Exactly. So I'm sure we'll be able to come up with all kinds of anecdotes as we go along. Okay, is basically our culture. We look at the different aspects of it. First of all, there's been a decline of social rules. If we compare now compared to maybe 40 years ago, 50 years ago, there's no need for approval anymore, right? Have you heard the saying, just do what feels good, I don't have to impress anybody, it's all about me and how I feel? My own son has said that to me recently. Well, Mom, you've always told me, don't worry about what people think, just be myself. And I was thinking, you know what, I think I have communicated that message. So I kind of backtracked and said, you know what, you do need to care about what people think, especially your teachers and your employers and those people who, have control over your future. You need to care what those people think. And I guess I was phrasing it more in terms of resisting peer pressure. You've got a young teenager, and so don't necessarily, go with the crowd. But he took that to the next level and said, well, I don't care what people think. I can say and do whatever I want. And that's not really the message that I intended on sending to him. So we had to have a little discussion about that, especially as I started getting this presentation ready. Okay, but these are some of the messages. It's good to be different. Do what's right for you. Who cares what you think? The other thing is that when I was in college, it used to be that the professors were revered. I mean, we had utmost respect for them. We always called them by their last names. I mean, they were seen as the experts. But now teachers and professors are seen as facilitators. They're not necessarily looked at as experts in their field. And so they're not really seen as authority figures. I mean, so much for the doctoral degree, right? Because you've got students who think they know just as much as you do. The other thing is TMI. What does TMI stand for? Okay, so since there's no need for approval, students, there's no editing, right? And so they don't hear people think. And so this self-disclosure I discovered can be really dangerous in a psychology class, particularly when you talk about the section on drugs and alcohol, and also on psychological disorders. And, it's the kind of thing where they don't understand that the class doesn't want to hear all about your manic episode and, things like that. But, the other thing is, I guess there have been some other presentations about servant leadership and things like that. It's an opportunity, though, maybe after class, to have conversations with them. But sometimes they don't understand what's appropriate and what's not in a classroom situation because they don't really care what people think. Right? Okay, there's a focus on the self. This started really in the 1970s, where the idea is that you're important and you should do what makes you happy. So in other words, we don't really care what other people think. In the 1980s, which is when I was in school, the emphasis was on improving kids' self-esteem. Do y'all remember that movement? Some of you were right there with me. Right? Okay, so there was an academic movement against criticizing children. And this is where you have these purple pens. Does anybody remember purple pens? Well, so teachers were told, don't do red pens because that might hurt the kids' feelings, right, or make them feel bad about themselves. So we're going to switch to purple. And also, we're not going to call it failure. We're going to just call it deferred success because we don't want anybody to feel bad about themselves.
My wife actually got E's instead of,
right.
In her school they got E's, not F's.
That's right.
Yeah.
So y'all are remembering this. And the other thing about this led to grade inflation too, because we don't want people to feel bad, so we're not going to fail anybody. There's a less emphasis on competition. Again, the focus on making you feel good about yourself. And this was also a time where everybody got a trophy. Do y'all remember that? Now, this mentality is still alive today. As I was getting this presentation ready, I attended my son's basketball game. And it was the last game of the season. My two boys who were in middle school played together on a YMCA team. My husband coached. And unfortunately, they did not win a single game. And it was okay. It was all about improvement and that kind of thing. They did work hard. However, you can imagine my chagrin when at the end of the last game, everybody got a trophy. And this is the trophy that my child got for his participation in the summer YMCA. So I'm just thinking, I said, but guys, you didn't win a game. I mean, I don't want to make you feel bad, but the truth is that, you worked hard, but you didn't win. And so we had a conversation, why should you get a trophy and then you get the same result as those teams that won every game? And so what happens when everybody gets a trophy? The standard goes down. Trophies don't mean anything anymore, right? And then you get students that go to college who've always gotten a trophy and they're wondering what happened to that A. We're all supposed to get A's, right?
Yeah.
So this is what happens. So on the surface, getting a trophy may feel good in the moment, but doesn't really set people up for the real world. Because in the real world, not everybody gets a trophy. And so it sets them up for disillusionment, is what happens.
Because they want one, because my husband deals with them every day, because they come in there like, I want a raise. And he's like, you're getting maximum salary for
Right.
your job here.
Right.
But they're not, they're brash, they'll just ask you.
And that's another thing we're going to talk about is the assertiveness that we see with this particular generation. But that's what happens when, as children, we give everybody trophies and we worry about how they feel and think. And then they get into the real world and they're disillusioned and the expectation is unrealistic. It's like this sort of self-esteem that's sort of cotton candy, not based on reality. And so they get into college and the real world and it doesn't work so well for them. Because like I said, everybody got a trophy growing up. Yes?
I had students say, when you get a job, well, I'll just tell them.
Right.
And they do.
I mean, just brash. I'll just tell them what I want.
And then they wonder why they got fired and are unemployed.
Exactly.
Because
That's
you
my
know,
response.
and that's great to be assertive, but you also have to have emotional intelligence to understand when to be assertive and when to sit back and be quiet. There's a time to speak and a time to be silent, right? But some of these students and kids growing up now don't understand that. They haven't been taught, right? So do you also kind of see how the culture does really impact the way that we behave and the way that we look at things? So were you going to say something?
Well, it just makes me reflect on sort of the last couple of years, my generation pushing back and saying, we should all be middle class. There should be nobody that's poor, there should be nobody that's rich, we should all be successful, regardless of the effort we put in. And just how that reflects so much
But
of
that's
this.
isn't that the message that you've gotten though? So I use this analogy in my classes. Let's say, look, you've got a group of students that works really hard, studies hard, and makes an A. And then you've got some that don't do anything and they end up with an F. And so what we'll do is we'll just take the average of all the grades and we'll give everybody a C. Because we're all middle class, right? We're all just kind of average somewhere in the middle. So what does that do?
Deflates your high learners.
It stifles motivation. There's sort of this emphasis on mediocrity, and there's not any kind of necessity to pursue excellence because we're all middle class when it all boils down to it, right? And so that also marginalizes and cheapens the effort of those people who worked really hard to get where they are.
And it makes them mad.
And it makes them resentful,
But
right?
I'll tell students at the first 6 weeks, of school, because I just act like this is really going to happen. And the top flight people, they are angry as they can be.
Right.
Because they did work hard, they did deserve it.
Well, and nothing is worse than working really hard and then having it taken away and give it to people that didn't.
Right.
And that's the analogy I'm talking, that's what you're talking about too, where everybody should just kind of be middle class, right?
Especially after the fact.
Okay, so another thought in terms of this generation is the idea that anything is possible. For those of you who were brought up in like the 70s and 80s, were you told that anything is possible? Follow your dreams.
You can be anything you want.
You can be anything you want to be, right?
Be all that you can be.
Be all that you can be. You're told never give up on your dreams, take as much time as you need to find yourself. In psychology, we call this emerging adulthood. It's actually a new kind of life stage, right? From the late teens to the 20s, where that is no longer a time where you necessarily have to work or do anything responsible. You just explore and find yourself, right? And our society condones that, right? There's no need to really figure things out.
Well, isn't it the parents that condone it? Because the parents are like, oh sure, move back home, or there's no. I'm in this Gen Me group, and there's no way my parents would let me move back for
So
college.
part
They're
of it
like,
is the expectation.
it's like you got a degree, you can live here, but you're gonna pay rent, but you're
Right.
finding a job. You're just not
Right.
gonna enjoy life.
Sure. So part of it does depend on the messages that students are getting or the people are getting. But what we see now is called the Peter Pan syndrome. What is the Peter Pan syndrome? I never want to grow up, right? We also see Failure to Launch, which is a really funny movie, and we all saw that with Matthew McConaughey. But there is some truth to that, the idea that you just don't want to ever leave home because it's so comfortable, and why would I want to go work and actually have to be responsible? So sometimes this message about anything is possible is unrealistic. It's not based on reality. Also, people think that they're going to be rich and famous. They might, but you need to have a plan B, in case that doesn't work out. But they are more confident in social situations, though. When they're told you can do and be anything you want to be, then you have, people asking for raises without, being nervous about it. So there's this confidence that a lot of people in generation may have. So there's this assertiveness, which, in my opinion, is not a bad thing. Again, it just depends on, knowing when it's appropriate and when it's not. We also have generation stressed. This particular group has a diagnosis of major depression that's higher than in previous decades. They tend to have more anxiety than in previous decades. The suicide rate has doubled. There's more loneliness, isolation, and part of that is these unrealistic expectations that students have. But if you look at our economy and the way our society is, it is much harder to get into college now, and it's harder to find a job to actually launch. And so it is a little more difficult than it was before. But there's also this lack of preparation for the real world. Yes?
These last two slides really resonate with me as I'm thinking about my area of criminal justice and how police are dealing a lot more with people that are drunk in public. There's just a lot more people in the population, a lot more people that are willing to act out. It used to be in the 50s, kind of like, all right, just put the handcuffs on me and they'll just go along peacefully. And now they're ready to fight, they're ready to just abuse anybody, they're more combative in social situations because they don't care what people think, the anxiety and stress situations, cases of psychological disorders are seemingly increasing.
Well, it used to be with the psychological disorders, there was sort of taboo around having a mental health issue. I mean, and not to say that jokingly, but it used to be that you kept that private. And now, and you teach psychology, you price this a lot, when you have discussions, people are really more than happy to share all of their different diagnoses and the lithium and all of that, their medication and, the domestic situation. I mean, and so sometimes I say, listen, this would be a great thing to talk about after class, I'd be happy to. And so I just have a line of students waiting to get like a little 5-minute counseling session. But I try to explain there are just some things that you don't want to share with a whole group of people that you really don't know that well. So that's another issue. Okay, victim mentality. Does anybody see victim mentality in our society? There's this lack of personal responsibility. If a student fails on something, I've found that a lot of times they will blame someone else for that failure. And it is a way of protecting that self-esteem I was telling you all about. If they fail a test, I've had students tell me, well, your study guide wasn't any good, and you were off topic. And it was all about everything that I did wrong. And I didn't offer multiple attempts on the test. And, it could just go on and on, right? And they do accept, they believe that they should be given as many chances as possible to get the grade that they feel like they deserve, right? But there's this blaming other people. Narcissism, and y'all know what narcissism is, right? What is narcissism? It's all about me. Who is narcissist? He gazed at his reflection and fell in love with himself, right, his appearance. And so some people tend to be very narcissistic, yes.
Can you speak, I can't remember, can you speak to, as a psychologist, that narcissism is no longer on the
DSM?
What is it? DSM?
Well, there is enough, the DSM-5, I know there's narcissistic personality disorder.
I thought it was being taken out.
Is that one still?
That's why we were hearing in psych classes last year.
The DSM-5 just came out.
Yeah, and it's still kind of a provisional,
Okay.
I'm sure.
Which is interesting that, if it's no longer considered a disorder.
Well, think about this. I mean, if a disorder indicates something sort of unusual, abnormal, and in our society, narcissism is not that unusual or abnormal anymore. In fact, it's unusual if you have some humility, right? That should go in the DSM.
Humility disorder.
Humility disorders, right?
There you go.
Okay. And then the entitlement. And we've already talked about entitlement, with the idea that you deserve something you didn't actually earn. Okay, so I was teaching about emerging adulthood last spring, and this news story came out. Does anyone know who Susie Lee Weiss is? Okay, so this came out in April. This was around the time that students were getting their college admission or rejection letters. And evidently Susie Lee was rejected for the first time in her life. And so she actually wrote a letter, and this kind of went viral. She wrote this letter, I think she originally was a blog, a letter to all the colleges that rejected her. And I was going to read just a little bit of the letter. Like me, millions of high school seniors with sour grapes are asking themselves this week how they failed to get into the college of their dreams. It's simple. For years, we were lied to. Colleges tell you just be yourself. That's great advice as long as yourself has 9 extracurriculars, 6 leadership positions, 3 varsity sports, killer SAT scores, and 2 moms. Then by all means, be yourself. If you work at a local pizza shop and are the slowest person on the cross-country team, consider taking your business elsewhere. What could I have done differently over the past few years? For starters, had I known 2 years ago what I know now, I would have gladly worn a headdress to school. Show me to any closet and I would have happily come out. Diversity. I have about as much diversity as a saltine cracker. If it were up to me, I'd have been any of the diversities. Navajo, Pacific Islander, anything. Senator Elizabeth Warren, I salute you in your 132nd Cherokee heritage. It just kind of goes on and on and on. Okay, and I'm not gonna, but you get the idea. Okay, so at the very end, she says, those that are claiming I'm bitter, you bet I am. An underachieving, selfish teenager making excuses for her own failures, that too. To those of you disgusted by this, shocked that I take for granted the wonderful gifts I've been afforded, I say, shh, the Real Housewives is on. Okay, this girl ended up on Good Morning America, discussing her letter. Why was this such a big deal?
So different.
When she got on Good Morning America, she said, well, it was just satire, you know? But do you think, are there any thoughts about why this was such a big deal? I mean, just some kid getting into school, and so she wrote a letter. I think that she represented the thoughts that so many young Americans have, right? The frustration. But part of that is because of how they've been conditioned to have these high expectations, to never have anything graded with a red pen, to be told, well, that's okay, you didn't actually fail, that's just deferred success, right? And so when everything is sugar-coated, they never have any disappointments. This is what happens. They think that they're going to get into the Ivy League school of their dreams. Just be yourself. Yeah, you can do pizza and you don't really have to accomplish anything because, you know, everybody gets a trophy anyway. And then, you know, then they're disillusioned and disappointed and upset. And so this is kind of the result of everyone getting a trophy is this kind of thing. And so I think that her sentiment is something that a lot of, you know, people in Generation Me feel when, and you know, she said that she felt like she had been lied to. And I guess in some ways, maybe Generation Me has been lied to, right? Okay, another headline that just absolutely infuriated me was this one that came out around the same time. Massachusetts principal calls off honors night because it could be devastating to students who missed the mark. I don't have a kid in the school. We don't even live in Massachusetts, but this made me really upset. How do you all feel about this? I mean, you can probably just gather what happened, I mean, just from the headline. So some kids are trying to achieve a certain GPA, there's an honors night, the principal gets worried that some kids might feel bad about themselves. So we're just going to cancel honors night.
You read what you said in Massachusetts.
I just kind of thought, what about all those kids that made the mark, who worked hard? Reward those kids that worked hard. Publish the honor roll, right? I mean, I'm sorry if some people may not feel bad, but another slide, feeling bad can actually be good. Because it'd be very motivating to say, yeah, I missed the mark this time, by golly, I'm going to put forth more effort, and I'm going to do better next time.
We could do what some schools do now, just when everybody makes the honor roll.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's not really an honor.
Exactly.
So,
Everybody
the
knows
kids
victorious.
know that, though.
Yeah.
The kids know it's not honor.
Yeah.
Some like kids got that trophy for basketball and they didn't win a single game. They knew that they weren't very good. I mean, but the trophy meant nothing, right? Yes.
When my wife was an administrator at law school, they were about to publish the top five in the law school class,
Mm-hmm.
and a student came in and said, "I want to protest. You can't do that." And said, "You're not one of the top 5." And she said, "Exactly. Then other people will know that I'm not one of them."
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "But you're not."
Right.
Which is exactly, I don't want people to know that I'm not holding
Right. But I think part of it is
She lost
there are
that kid.
people like there are people like your wife in the younger years saying that to these kids though. I had a student who told me, he's like, you know, I'd be really surprised if I fail your class. And I looked at him because he hadn't passed a single test. And he never, I mean, he did come to class, but he never had a book, he didn't take notes. I mean, his comments were sort of off topic. And I said to him, I said, I don't want to be rude, but I'm going to be surprised if you pass. And I mean, that was just the reality of the situation. And he didn't pass, you know? And I mean, I feel bad for him, but I don't feel like he should get credit for something he didn't earn, right? But this is the way our society is going, and at the community college level where I'm teaching now, I mean, I kind of feel like that it's going to be the kind of thing where everybody's going to end up passing, or at least we're going to be forced to or told to. So, yes.
I really like, I want to give an example of my nephew. Like last year, he didn't do good at all. He's in South America, and he failed, you know, he didn't pass his grade. But, you know, it was good. You know, at one point I was praying for him, Lord, let him pass, but then I
Yes.
was, let your will be done. And he failed his grade, he didn't make it, and he repeated the grade. And you can imagine how much he got out of that, how much he gained, you know. His learning skills are so much better. He just passed everything now with A's, B's, and C's, where he's a very hard worker, but he needs attention. So it's like really like, what do you want? Yes, you don't want to kind of maybe like disappoint the person, you know, like hurt their self-esteem. But you can see if he had passed, for example, in another system, that he would have never, you know, got to know how I study, how do I study, how do I learn something. And now he can independently and in a group, like, you know, like move forward. So yes, it is a way of helping maybe a person, their self-esteem, but on the other hand, we are, you know, and that's, I think that's happening also now in China. China is so much better now, for example, educational-wise than the whole world. Why? Because if there's so much competition, if you don't make it, you stay up behind, you fail, you don't pass. So, and that's what we have to be careful for, you know, in the United States, that we have to really, you know, because the whole world is, Brazil is coming to the number 5th, and you know, the economy is going up, the education system is high. Why? Because they are behind this whole system, you know. You have to perform, if you don't perform, you're off the hook, you know, and it's not to hurt you, but, you know, we have to be able to compete, so.
Exactly. And the idea of failure, I think it's what you do with the failure that's actually more important.
Yeah.
Because, is it your nephew you said? He used that experience to say, you know what, I need to figure out how to be successful, because what I did this year didn't work, and evidently he put forth a lot of effort and then had a success after a failure. So he's going to know what to do the next time that he fails, or it gets disappointed about something. You know, he'll remember that experience and say, you know what, okay, I failed, but I picked myself back up and actually was successful, right? He probably worked a lot harder that year. Yes.
My youngest son is like the brains of the children, and he was one of those that through public school, he just blew it away because there was no real standard and stuff. And when we moved here, he started doing dual enrollment, and he took a calculus class, so the first test he studied like he always studied. And he failed the first test. And he came into my office and he was about in tears. And I said, what are you going to do with this? And he said, it's never going to happen again. And he knew that now there's not a blow off, read it through a little bit, you know, I can do whatever.
Right.
And he still was, if I wouldn't have spaced out, you know, still he goes back to that and he uses it to continue to
and
encourage
that sounds
it.
like a positive, I mean, you know, nobody likes to fail a test, but it sounds like that was actually a positive thing for him. And see, what I'm afraid of is a lot of students in that situation would say, well, that professor didn't teach anything, the test was too hard, nothing was on the study guide, I didn't get multiple chances. As opposed to saying, what can I do to do better? It's the teacher's fault.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm surprised, you must be a horrible father that you didn't write the professor.
Yeah,
exactly.
Maybe actually suffer the consequences.
Well, that's one thing that we've decided, you know,
No, I
a long time ago.
No.
But I had a student that she failed my first test. And she sends me this email, says, you know, Dr. Rouse, I belong to this honor society, this honor thing, this honor thing, this honor thing. And I think it's horrendous that somebody as smart as I am is gonna have their 4.0 ruined by some intro class.
And yeah, and so how did you respond to that?
Well, I've learned to type the email in Notepad
Yeah.
so I can vent. Then you finally,
Yes.
then I'm like, well, you're welcome to come in and discuss this with me, but the grade will stand as
Yeah.
is, you know.
You know, so I think I've learned that the responses should be brief, so you don't give them a lot of ammunition. And then also, like you said, don't just email immediately, because you might put something in there that you'll regret later, and it's like in writing. So, because, you know, and also if we understand the generation, I actually, after having read this book about Generation Me, I understand, I still don't necessarily condone like an email like that, but understand where she's coming from, because that's what she's
That's
been
what she
led
was
to
told.
believe.
Yeah.
I have students say, I'm a straight A student, so why do I not have an A in your class? Like,
Because
I
you
don't
don't
know.
because you don't have
You tell me.
One more thing, concerning
Yes.
the study guides, like, I don't give my students a study guide.
Mhm.
You know, I give them, in fact, just some rules, like just points how to put the study guide together.
Right.
Because if you end up doing that, you know, you will get them out of class and they won't be able to kind of summarize what they have, you know, in fact received in class, how to incorporate it. So
Mhm.
concerning study guide, I'm like, this is what you have to do to put one together, and then I collect study guides from them, and they get graded for example, putting a study guide together.
So you make them do it?
Yes,
Okay.
because, and I have had, you know, a few students coming up to me and just telling me how much they have learned, you know, just by, because it is then right before the exam, one
Mhm.
class before the exam period that they give it to me, how much, so it is like a review for them, and they can review their material and then come to the exam, but, I mean, like,
Yeah.
so it is of the, you know, because whenever they are in society, they won't call you, I need to make a summary, this is what my boss gave to me, I need to,
They'll need to do it on their own.
yeah, so it.
Yes,
So
well, I don't know if I do, we do a study guide similar, but I just have a list of topics typically, and they get upset because it's like, this is just topics, where, I mean, it's like, no, you actually have to go and figure it out what that is, and
Yeah.
maybe
You're
be able to
supposed to
apply
spoon
it.
feed me and.
And I get another thing, this wasn't in the book. No, it wasn't specifically in the book because it's an application question. You know, we're not gonna have every, you know, you need to understand the concept. The concepts are in the book, but you need to be able to apply the concept. Okay, we've also changes in attitude and personality. And some of these things are, in my mind, are positives. The idea of being more accepting of women and minorities. These students are very comfortable with diversity. They are more assertive, like we were talking about, but that can be a good thing, you know, if it's done appropriately. They're not necessarily spoiled or have it easy. Like I said, I mean, this particular economy that these students are coming out is pretty tough. I mean, finding jobs and kind of getting started. They do tend to need praise and appreciation. They appreciate directness. They don't do well with ambiguity. So for example, if someone was in the hospital and they wanted an extension on something, they provide the documentation, because I expect them to provide that. And then I don't tell them specifically when they need to have it in. It could be the end of the semester. Well, you said I could have an extension, you know. So the idea is that you need to be very direct, very specific. I don't know about on this particular campus because I haven't taught here before. I'm not sure about the dress here. Is it pretty casual or? Well, at the community college, and I'm thinking that it may be a little bit different there. Some of the students are just kind of inappropriately dressed. Some of them wear the sagging pants, and some of them just show a lot of skin, you know. It can be very distracting, so I'm not really sure here. But the students are very casual, and some of them come in those pajama bottoms, and that's a lot different than when I was growing up. There was some sort of standard for dress that's not really there anymore. And again, no automatic respect for authority. And they'll even tell you how you can improve your class, or at least they'll tell me. And I always thank them for their opinion and advice. You know, take that into consideration. So some of these things are not necessarily negative, right? I mean, there's some of these things that are positive. So implications for teaching. So this is a generation that is very technologically savvy. And so incorporating technology is generally going to be a good thing. Using video clips, moving graphics. A lot of students don't read, especially dense passages. And of course you want them to, but I've just come to the conclusion that some will and some won't. Use demonstrations, role play, like some of the psychology with theater, you know, doing those kind of kinesthetic, interactive, creative kind of things. Use the Socratic method where you're actually asking them questions as opposed to sort of lecturing. Having them do things themselves, like you were talking about the syllabus, and also having very specific requirements in the syllabus. A lot of times my syllabus is very lengthy because it has all these different policies that have been accumulated over the years. Things that you thought you would never have to put in a syllabus have had to be put in there. Those things that you just think are sort of common sense. So you want to be very specific, have your policies in place, so there's no ambiguity. We don't do well with ambiguity. Also, restrict special accommodations. Now, I don't mean that if you get a legal document where someone has gone through the proper channels. I mean, if you get those kind of accommodations requests, then you have to honor them legally. But I mean like people who ask if they can turn things in late and ask for special privileges and things like that. Do y'all get those kind of requests? And so my thought about that is that you want to treat everyone the same. And so if you're going to give an extension to one student, you should give them to everyone, right? If you allow a student to take a test later, then everyone should be given that same opportunity. Because, you know, as we've heard in previous presentations, students do talk to each other, right? And so I always, when I'm trying to make a decision, I always try to think about what's fair. What would be fair for everybody? And so if I do give special treatment, I always will give everyone that same consideration. Establishing good boundaries. When you say no to students, a lot of times they don't like that. If y'all said no and they keep coming back, I would say no, and then I get an email, are you sure, and can we just do this, or can I just take the test again? And I mean, they're very persistent, even when you do say no. But sometimes they really do get kind of almost combative or angry when you say no. And so you have to kind of, you know, if you've got children, now that I have kids, I have no problem telling people no. I've got 2 middle school boys, and that's just kind of comes out of my mouth on a regular basis. So, but just to say no, I mean, and you don't have to be mean about it. I mean, I don't say to say no to everything, but you do have to really establish those boundaries, and early. Establishing the boundaries early. Because if you're real strict and establish boundaries early, they'll think it's a gift if you've lightened up on something later in the semester. It's hard to go back and establish boundaries, you know, mid-semester. So I think I was pretty successful last year, sort of putting the fear of God in people, because I didn't have as much excuse making that one semester as I did. I just kind of put it all out there that first day, and I didn't really have too many students not taking tests when they were supposed to and not turning things in. So. And also providing frequent feedback. When I was in college, we typically just had a midterm and a final, and now that's not what they mean. Students expect lots of assignments and grades and papers and things like that. So that's another thing that sort of changed. Were you going to say something?
No, I was just agreeing.
Yeah, so providing frequent feedback. Also, abandoning obsession with self-esteem. Actually, Martin Seligman has said these programs are empty and short-sighted. Why are they empty and short-sighted? The self-esteem movement, making everybody feel good about themselves.
Self-esteem without the requisite capabilities leads to the problem we've got right now.
Just mediocrity.
Yeah.
Why try? I'm good just the way that I am, right? Real self-esteem actually comes from actually achieving something. So we kind of got it backwards. Actually, high grades would be what would lead to high self-esteem, not the other way around, right? And also, the idea of feeling bad can actually be a good thing. It may be painful in the moment, but long term, if you think about delayed gratification, long term, it can actually be good for people. Teaching self-control rather than self-esteem. If you can teach students to be self-controlled, self-disciplined, helping them delay their gratification, you know, long term versus short term, that can really help them, not just in your class, but in life. Because those people that are controlled tend to be more successful.
That's a much more biblical approach.
anyway, when you look at verses that talk about self in the Bible, 75% of them are talking about self-control.
Exactly.
They're not talking about feeling good about yourself.
Right.
It's about learning those skills. So I think we do a disservice as Christian professionals to be dealing with self-esteem rather than helping them deal with self-control.
That's a good, very good point.
The Christian worldview of self-esteem is very different.
Oh, yeah.
Because the Christian worldview of self-esteem is the true self comes from God. Self-esteem is not found within the self, it's found in God.
Right.
And so this idea that we can generate, like a spider spins its webs, generate self-esteem from ourselves is not a biblical concept.
Well, yes, that's a good point.
I was going to say what it does is it locates my source of self-esteem on others outside here, rather than what I know about myself in here and what God tells me about my heart, which is that it's kind of dark, dirty, and in need of some correction and righteousness and other things, and so, you know, and also if you think about the political and cultural and legal and social ramifications of that, you know, the delayed gratification, the idea of internal versus external control, you know, more laws means more police that need to control us from the outside. You know, it's the Bible with the bayonet thing all over again.
True. Well, and on the surface, self-esteem does seem biblical, right? Because we're, you know, from a young age, you're told that you're special because God loves you and you're created by God. But that's only on the surface, right? Because you do have this self-esteem or this sense of self-worth that's based on your, you know, being a child of God. But there's also a responsibility that comes with that, right? And a humility and a gratitude. You know, you're grateful, not entitled. And so that's what it is, the subtle difference, right?
Well, I like what C.S. Lewis says at the end of Mere Christianity. He says the only way to get a real self is to give the self to God. That's the only way to get a real self.
Right.
And of course, Jesus said, you know, if you want to find your life, you have to give your life.
Exactly.
And so, it's very different from the self-esteem we're taught in school.
Right, the self-esteem that's taught in school is basically we feel good about ourselves
Right.
regardless of what we do.
Right.
And I'm sorry, some people should feel bad about themselves for the things that they do. I'm not always about making people feel good. That guilt and shame, that's a powerful motivator too. Right? I'd be kind of worried if that people were feeling good about themselves after some of the things that they did.
That's so
You know?
objectivist. We're relativists now.
Yeah, that could be a whole other presentation. Okay, I'm going to give you a very quick recent example. This is the LeTu student sent me this email.
Yeah, I would just say that as we throw blame around, we need to be careful because I see the biggest exporters of this negative kind of self-esteem to actually be Christian parents. And that's where I've dealt with it most, not in public school. It's been with Christian. Yeah. Therefore, I've got to create a safe place for my child, and those kinds of issues that, and so we become very child-centric rather than Christocentric in our lives and our families, and things like that. And so maybe it might not have as many sound bites to it as I've seen up here, but I think it's much more insidious.
So can you give an example of what you're talking about?
Yeah. You need to wait to get married until you have your whole life together. And so you must have your college education, you must have this job and all that. This is Christian parents, right? Meanwhile, puberty, you're ready to have sex at 11.5, but you got to wait until you're 25 when you get married. And Christians have bought into this and actually are some of the biggest promoters of it. And it sets up children, sets up expectations that they could never meet because they're going to have sex. Not that it's automatic. I think you can have self-control, but I mean, the facts speak clearly. So, and that's one place. There's not a sound bite there, but it's an occurrence. And so, really Christian parents should be encouraging early marriage and then providing a support, a biblical, or I wouldn't say biblical, a more Christian support system for them. you know, in that sense. I mean, that's one thing. I mean, it's maybe not as obvious, but I think it's more. And then a more obvious one is, come to Sunday school and we'll give you donuts. So, you know, this reward, this false reward. Yeah. Oh, no, we'll replace it with grapes, as if grapes don't have
Well,
as
I
much
gotta
sugar as
say, I
donuts.
have souped boys at middle school,
Anyway.
and I'm sorry, but the food, that is really enticing to them.
Well, it's because we, as I said, we're purveyors of it, of the very system that you're indicating, the churches. So that's why it's easy to say, oh, it's the school that does this. It's us, and I think John was kind of good at it. It's us that do it, and you know, I think we kind of have to own up to our own. It's easy to say, oh, it's the kids' problem. No, it's we did it.
Yeah, well, that's kind of how we got
And we
where
bought
are.
into it, and it's a bit more subtle, and now we get the,
Well, who is responsible for conditioning Generation Me to be this way? It's not them, really.
yeah.
Isn't it the parents and society
Yes.
and the teachers and just, you know, it's not necessarily, I don't want to say it's all their fault, really, although I do like them to take personal responsibility, but it's like how they get that way, right?
Yeah.
They've been conditioned to feel and to be this way.
Well, I think and you were getting at it with some of your examples, I think part of what we have to think about our jobs as even college professors, you might call it reparenting.
Yeah.
And not be sad about it, you know, I gotta do other, hey, here's a joyful experience, we get to reparent, you know, and that's part of what, and yeah, I'm sure you know, as you probably well know, adolescence, mid and upper is older, and so we're getting them at mid-adolescence, not upper adolescence.
Exactly.
And so, you know, so we have parenting roles, and to really just own it and be honored by the opportunity.
Well, and I just don't,
Yeah.
and y'all probably agree with this, that as a college instructor, you are still helping prepare them for the real world that many of them are not prepared for or haven't been prepared for up to that point. And so I want to just get your feedback on this email. This email came to me on Wednesday. And it says, so the student says, in my grades, it shows that I have some missing work. And we're on the 4th week of a 5-week class. I'm aware there are a few things that I missed, but I thought that I turned in a few of the others. Could you please tell me what I'm missing? First of all, there is the online grade book.
That is what I hear.
Could you also know if some of it isn't graded yet, or the grade just isn't posted? When I post a 0, that means that I've completed the grading, right? Okay, and for the things that I'm missing, would it be possible if I could still turn them in for partial credit? So I'm going to throw this out there. What would you do?
I've had this, not this same email, but something similar happened before. I stayed on my syllabus, I don't accept late work. And so I sent an email back saying, well, yes, you did miss these assignments, and I did not accept late work to 0 stands.
Well, and so you have to have in your syllabus, although my understanding is LeTourneau has now adopted some very lenient late policy. Actually, my middle school kids have a stricter policy than the LeTourneau University students. I've never worked in an institution that didn't allow instructors to have their own late policy, but I think it is so lenient. And personally, I think it hurts them because they think that they can turn things in late without much of a penalty. I've had students fail because they just thought, I'll just get around to doing it. They don't. If you have a really strict, direct, late policy like what you're describing, by golly, they're going to get that in. And so I actually think that LeTourneau policy hurts students long term. And doesn't teach them the importance of meeting deadlines.
And that's online only. That's not
Okay.
university-wide.
So I need
It's
to
online.
come face to face, right? Okay, we'll just move along, people.
But is that
And
newer?
it's 10% per day. It's been about a year now.
But they can turn something in up to 10 days late and still get partial credit.
Well, no, that would be 0.
10%.
10 days late would be a 0.
Not,
9 days should be 10%.
Well, actually, on the policy, it says they have 10 days, so we might have to go calculate the math. I don't think I've ever had
No,
to
it says
do-
10% per day late.
Okay, I thought it also specified how many days, but.
And we don't have that for.
It says up to 10 days late.
I'm the
because that
compliance
would be
guy.
A 0, and
Your
you can wait their time.
Right,
professor set
exactly.
policy for ground instruction.
Oh, okay, but it's standardized for the online.
It's standardized for the online, and I understand why because I think they're trying to make things very uniform
Right.
online,
That
because
was
it's just
you
so
know,
ripe
Go
for
from one
abuse.
class to the next, and there's
It's
about
just very
policies.
uniform, but they just have a uniform late policy. And I do implement it because we have to, but at the same time, I really firm, try to be firm in the syllabus to say, I really don't like things that are done late. Okay, so in this situation, this is a 5-week course. For week 2, she didn't have a written assignment, a quiz wasn't done. Week 3, the midterm exam wasn't done. She didn't do discussions either week, Tuesday or Wednesday, or no, I'm sorry, not Tuesday, Wednesday, week 2 or week 3. So I guess, here we are in week 4, and my personal feeling is if you missed the discussion that week, I'm sorry, that can't be made up, because you can't go back and have a discussion with your classmates. I'm not going to go in and reopen an exam unless I'm willing to reopen it for everyone in the class and give everyone another chance, and I'm not willing to do that. And so we'll look at when the written assignment was due, but since we're in week 4, it's probably more than 10 days, so no, we can't make that up either. So I suggest that you make sure that you finish strong. We've got 2 weeks, and make sure you turn your things in because we're not going back. But I guess
And nothing can be turned in after week 5's over.
right, exactly.
I love that one.
Yeah,
Nothing
so
can be turned in
class
Fine,
is
if it's great,
over,
but
that's-
is there anything I can
I have
do?
students that will turn in work on Monday, but see, I try to get in there and get the grading done early so I can then say, I'm sorry, I've already submitted a final grade. Because then you just kind of nip that in the bud,
That's right.
right? Because otherwise, there's some of that gray area. And so you feel bad in some ways, but I guess if they are enabled in that way, they'll just think that every instructor will let them turn things in late. And it's not just about me and my class, but it's about the standard and expectation for everyone else. It's not fair to everyone else on campus who's trying to have these standards and expectations. So you've got someone that's lenient, that creates an expectation, right? And so, so any other thoughts about how you would respond?
I actually
Yes.
had kind of a flip of this. I had a student that he emails me after the class is done. Because I got a C in this class, I'm gonna lose the scholarship. But he goes through this whole scenario. I know your policy, so I know you're gonna say this, and I would respond. He goes through the whole conversation, and I'm like, well said.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
did
you know the
good.
answer.
So I just emailed him back and I said, you said it very well. The only thing you left out was that it wouldn't be fair to the other students if I gave you that. But other than that, you said it really good. Grade stands as is.
I had something similar. I was teaching at Mary Hardin Baylor. Are y'all familiar with Melton? And so there was someone from Alaska that was there, and she didn't turn in a paper. It wasn't turned in on time, and I wasn't going to accept it. And they knew about the entire semester, and there were all kinds of reminders. So she ended up with a very low GPA that semester. And I got an email like March. I mean, I wasn't even at the school anymore. She was asking if I would accept her paper so that I could change her grade, so that her grade point average would go up so she wouldn't have to go back to Alaska. So that was, like I said, months. I'm like, wait, who is this? What would y'all do? I think I already know what
I
you
said,
said.
I have a boss.
Fun in Alaska.
I'll help you pack.
I think Alaska's nice this time of year.
It's not nice in March. I wonder if
No, I haven't been
May.
to Alaska. It's what's on my bucket list. But I just said, look, I mean, how is that fair to the other students who would have liked another opportunity to turn the paper in? I said, just not fair. I said, in college you have to know how to meet deadlines, to plan ahead. I mean, to do all those things.
Well, out in the real world, you have to know how to
Well,
meet
that, I
deadlines.
guess exactly, and
for your class.
that's the frustration is that I'm not being mean. I am actually helping you long term. It'll be so much easier to accept the
But
work.
to me, that's the interesting thing, is they don't see college as the real world. They
Right.
do not see it as preparation for the real world. There's something artificial and different about this. And when they go into the real world, they're gonna be totally different people. They are having trouble making connection between, this is a proving ground and preparation ground.
Right.
Those same kinds of things. It makes sense to all of us for, you didn't turn things in on time now, is your boss gonna take things late? And it's like, oh, no, I know my boss will take things late, but it's like, put 2 and 2 together, but there's a
You're
lot of
practicing.
times,
It's just like
the
It's just like the home is the preparation for the real world. It's artificial, but it's still preparation. So
This thing is so totally different that they see no overlap between the two.
Right.
The real world
There's
says
some
you get
personalities
something
that's
on
different
time,
from
period.
personality.
So they
Always.
should
Well, does
know
anyone
that.
else have a comment about this particular email, yes.
I mean, this person does have some factually verifiable things that are being said. There's some things that this person thinks were done that aren't done. And if she could actually demonstrate that, then you can say, you can come into my office and show me what it is you think you've done that didn't show up in the grade book.
Well, the thing about it is that it's pretty clear online if you submit something or you
There's a
don't.
little green box with an exclamation point that says, yes, they have.
I say this is really black and white, either you did it or you didn't.
education.
Well, obviously, I mean, some of the things I do are not okay, so.
Right, but even, okay, so even face-to-face classes, if someone says, I did something, let's say like someone says, I did the assignment, or I did the paper, and there's a 0 in the grade book. Then I'll say, well, come to me and let me see the paper that I graded, like with my initials on it, and I'll just, you know, go ahead and I have made mistakes before. You know, and so they bring it and I fix it and I apologize and it's good, but then you have other people say, turn it and they really didn't. You know, and I don't know about, again, Latorno maybe it's going to probably be a little bit different than say, you know, local community college.
Or they bring it with a grade on it, but it's not your handwriting.
Yeah, because they have
It's obviously not mine.
right, it needs to be in my handwriting, and something I graded. And so, but yeah, I mean, certainly, I mean, if there was maybe a mistake on the grade book, I mean, you definitely, I really think it's important to get the grade right. But you also just don't want to enable students to misbehave, you know, and not to be responsible. So it's kind of a fine line there. But does anybody have, I think that was it, does anybody have any questions or comments or things?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm just thinking about, I mean, this is such a complex issue. I mean, because it emerges from a very, very complex set of social factors, of which, I mean, I think as Pat was sort of saying, to which we all contribute in both good and bad ways, right? So we're complicit kind of in the same brokenness that we're seeing work out here. And so in light of that complexity, I mean, you can feel kind of discouraged by it, but you can also see the gift of sort of working in a Christian institution of living and learning, where you have a chance to sort of renew your commitment to teach, you know, not out of cynicism towards the brokenness, but from a posture of, you know, self-giving love, so that we recognize that, students aren't coming to us fully formed yet, just like we didn't come fully formed either when we were in college. And so it presents, you know, sort of this remarkable opportunity to meet this with a certain kind of posture of self-giving love, and then sort of shepherd in that way. So, yeah, so I'm just thinking, just reflecting back to sort of the complexity of the big issue, thinking about how I'm complicit also, and how this works, and how maybe I'm not as blunt as this person, but yeah, I can mediate my selfishnesses in much more subtle ways. You know, but it's a, you know, it's a problem we all share and are being sort of redeemed from by the Spirit's slow work in us through our community.
And it's difficult too, because I have a student that's sort of in this situation, but he's medically fragile. And he's got a lot of medical issues. And, you know, I've tried to be very gracious with him, but now that we're down to the crunch, and, you know, we're at the end of our little summer term, and he's not being forthcoming with some stuff. You know, I appreciate your medical fragileness, and the fact that you've been sick, and blah, blah, but there comes a point where, own it, you know.
And that's hard, isn't it, as an instructor, to find that happy medium, because you do want to be gracious. You want to extend grace to people who are, you know, in the hospital or medically fragile. I mean, I'm not saying don't extend, you know, look at the circumstances. I mean, but at the same time, you don't want to be part of the problem by enabling him. And so, but there's a fine line there, and there's not really a manual that tells you how to do that. So you have to sort of use discernment, right?
If we're going to be clear, then it's time's up.
Oh, okay.
If we're going to be clear. But if you'd like to continue the conversation, please.
Yes, thank you all
Continue
for
that.
coming.